The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thin and official-looking, with a return address from the municipal tax office of Greenfield County. Sarah Chen stood in the narrow kitchen of her basement apartment, the paper trembling slightly in her hands as she read the words for the third time. Her 7-year-old daughter, Maya, sat at the small table behind her, carefully spreading peanut butter on crackers because they had run out of bread 2 days ago. The letter was brief, almost dismissive in its tone. It informed her that the old Lincoln Elementary School, abandoned for nearly 15 years, was being offered for sale by the county. Due to extensive property tax arrears and the cost of demolition, the starting bid had been set at $1. The auction would be held the following Thursday at the county courthouse, and anyone interested was welcome to attend. Sarah read it again, her lips moving silently over the words. $1. The phrase seemed absurd, like something from a dream or a cruel joke. She had seen the building once, years ago, when she first moved to Greenfield. It sat at the edge of town, a hulking 3-story structure of red brick and broken windows, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. The kind of place children dared each other to approach after dark, where weeds grew tall enough to hide entire cars, and the air always smelled faintly of rot and rust. "Mom, are we going to Aunt Diane's for Thanksgiving?" Maya asked, her voice small and hopeful. Sarah folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. She didn't answer right away. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away, and she had no idea where they would be by then. The landlord had given them notice to vacate by the end of the month, not because they had done anything wrong, but because he was selling the building, and the new owners wanted everyone out. She had been searching for another place they could afford, but everything in Greenfield, even the worst apartments, cost more than she could manage on her paycheck from the diner. "Maybe, sweetheart," she said finally, forcing a smile. "We'll see." Maya nodded and went back to her crackers, humming softly to herself. Sarah watched her daughter for a moment, the small shoulders bent over the plate, the dark hair falling across her face. Maya never complained. She never asked for toys or new clothes or the things other children had. She simply adapted, and the way children do when the world gives them no other choice. That quiet resilience broke Sarah's heart more than any tantrum ever could. That night, after Maya had fallen asleep in the twin bed they shared, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. The numbers told the same story they always did. Not enough. Never enough. Her shifts at the diner brought in just over $1,000 a month. Rent alone ate up $700. There was electricity, phone, bus fare, food, and the small payments she made toward the medical debt left over from Maya's emergency appendectomy 2 years ago. Every month, the balance shrank a little more, and every month, she fell a little further behind. She picked up the letter again and stared at it. $1. What kind of building could be worth only $1? When she opened her laptop, the old machine groaning to life, and searched for information about Lincoln Elementary, the first result was a newspaper article from 2009, yellowed and scanned, with a headline that read, "Historic School to Close After 87 Years." The article described the building's long history, how it had been built in 1922 as the centerpiece of Greenfield's growing community, a symbol of progress and hope. For decades, it had educated the children of farmers, shopkeepers, and factory workers. But enrollment had declined as families moved away, and by the late 1990s, the district could no longer justify keeping it open. In 2009, the doors closed for the last time. Sarah clicked through more links. There were photos of the school in its prime, black and white images of children lined up on the front steps, and teachers standing proudly beside them. The building looked solid and dignified, with tall windows and a bell tower rising above the roofline. But the more recent photos told a different story. Broken glass, graffiti, collapsed ceilings, and floors littered with debris. One article mentioned that the city had considered converting it into apartments or a community center, but the cost of renovations was deemed too high. Another mentioned that several developers had expressed interest over the years, only to walk away once they saw the extent of the damage. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. What was she even thinking? She didn't have money for renovations. She didn't have money for anything. Buying an abandoned school, even for $1, would be insane. And yet, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a question she couldn't quite silence. What if? What if there was something there? What if the building could be salvaged, rented out, turned into something that could generate income? What if it was the opportunity she had been praying for, disguised as a disaster? The next morning, she called the county office and asked about the auction. The woman on the phone sounded bored, as though she had answered the same questions 100 times before. "It's first come, first served," she said. "Bring cash or a cashier's check for the bid amount. If you win, you take possession immediately, but you're also responsible for all back taxes, liens, and any demolition or safety violations. We're selling it as is. No warranties, no inspections." "How much are the back taxes?" Sarah asked, her stomach tightening. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Looks like about $18,000, plus another 12 in demolition liens. So, total liability is around $30,000, give or take." Sarah's breath caught. $30,000? She might as well have said 30 million. She thanked the woman and hung up, feeling foolish for even calling. But over the next few days, the idea refused to let go of her. She found herself thinking about the school at odd moments during her shift at the diner, while folding laundry, while lying awake in the dark. She imagined walking through its empty halls, imagined what it might have looked like when children still filled it with noise and life. She thought about the letter, the strange, almost offhand way it had arrived, as though the universe were dangling a possibility in front of her, daring her to reach for it. On Wednesday evening, she mentioned it to her coworker, Lisa, a woman in her 50s, who had worked at the diner longer than anyone could remember. Lisa listened with a skeptical expression, stirring sugar into her coffee. "An abandoned school," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Sarah, honey, that's not an opportunity. That's a liability. You'd be buying a lawsuit waiting to happen. What if someone gets hurt on the property? What if the city comes after you for cleanup costs?" "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But what if there's something there? What if it could be fixed up?" Lisa shook her head. "Even if you could afford to fix it, which you can't, who's going to rent space in a falling-apart school at the edge of town? You've got a daughter to think about. Don't throw away what little you have on a pipe dream." Sarah nodded, but the words stung more than they should have, because Lisa was right. It was a pipe dream. And yet, when she walked home that night, she found herself taking a detour, turning down the narrow road that led past the old school. The building loomed against the darkening sky, its silhouette jagged and broken. The fence around it sagged in places, and the no trespassing signs were faded and rusted. But even in its decay, there was something about it that called to her. Something solid and enduring, as though it were waiting for someone to remember what it had once been. The auction was held in a small room on the second floor of the county courthouse. Sarah arrived early, saw clutching a cashier's check for $1 that she had gotten from the bank that morning. The teller had looked at her strangely when she requested it, as though suspecting a joke. The room was mostly empty. A handful of people sat scattered in folding chairs, most of them older men in work boots and flannel shirts, probably contractors looking for salvage materials. At the front of the room, a man in a gray suit shuffled papers and spoke quietly with a clerk. Sarah took a seat near the back and waited, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The auctioneer began promptly at 10 o'clock. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice that carried no emotion. He read through the property description quickly, noting the address, the lot size, and the condition. "As you can see from the inspection report," he said, holding up a thin folder, "the structure has significant damage. Roof failure, water intrusion, mold, asbestos in the insulation, lead paint. The city estimates demolition costs at approximately $12,000. Back taxes, total $18,000. Buyer assumes all liability." One of the men in the front row stood up and left without a word. Another muttered something under his breath and shook his head. The auctioneer didn't seem surprised. "Starting bid is $1, he said. "Do I have a bidder?" Silence filled the room. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest. The auctioneer waited, scanning the room with a weary expression. "Anyone?" he asked. $1? Sarah raised her hand. The motion felt dreamlike, as though someone else were controlling her body. The auctioneer looked at her, his expression faintly surprised. "No, we have $1 from the woman in the back. Anyone else?" No one moved. He waited another moment, then brought his gavel down with a sharp crack. "Sold to bidder number 7 for $1. The room emptied quickly. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, unable to quite believe what had just happened. The clerk approached her with a clipboard and several forms. "Congratulations," the woman said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You'll need to sign here, here, and here, and initial here." Sarah signed mechanically, her hand shaking slightly. When it was done, the clerk handed her a thick envelope. "Deed, tax records, and violation notices. You have 30 days to address the safety issues, or the city will proceed with demolition and bill you for the cost. Good luck." Sarah walked out of the courthouse in a daze. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in her hands. She had just bought a building for $1, and now she owed $30,000 she didn't have. By the time she reached the bus stop, reality had begun to settle in, cold and unforgiving. What had she done? That evening, she sat Maya down and tried to explain. "Mommy bought a building today," she said, choosing her words carefully. "It's an old school. It needs a lot of work, but maybe we can fix it up." Maya's eyes widened. "A whole school? Can I see it?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "This weekend. We'll go look at it together." But when she called Lisa later that night, her friend's response was less enthusiastic. "You actually did it?" Lisa said, her voice rising. "Sarah, what were you thinking? You don't have $30,000. You don't even have $3,000. What happens when the city comes after you for that money?" Sarah didn't have an answer. She lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had just made the worst mistake of her life. Friday morning, she called in sick to work and drove to the school. The building looked even more forbidding in daylight. The brick facade was stained with years of water damage, and several windows on the upper floors were missing entirely, leaving dark, gaping holes. The front entrance was boarded up with plywood, and the steps leading up to it were cracked and uneven. She walked the perimeter slowly, taking in the sheer size of the place. 3 stories, easily 20 classrooms, a gymnasium, a cafeteria. It was massive, far larger than she had imagined. At the back of the building, she found a door that had been pried open, the lock broken. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The air hit her immediately, thick and damp, smelling of mildew and decay. The hallway stretched ahead of her, lined with rusted lockers and piles of debris. The floor was covered in broken glass, old papers, and pieces of collapsed ceiling tile. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, casting strange, angular shadows across the walls. She moved cautiously, testing each step before putting her weight down. Some of the floorboards creaked ominously, and in places, she could see gaps where the wood had rotted through completely. At the end of the hall, she found a staircase leading up to the second floor, The railing was missing in places, and the stairs themselves looked unstable, but she climbed them anyway, or her hand pressed against the wall for balance. The second floor was in even worse condition. The roof had partially collapsed in one section, and rain had poured in for years, warping the wood and coating everything in a layer of greenish-black mold. But as she walked through the empty classrooms, she began to notice things she hadn't expected. The bones of the building were still solid. The brick walls were intact. The floors, though damaged, hadn't collapsed. And in some of the rooms, there were remnants of the school's past. A chalkboard still hanging on the wall, though cracked and faded. A bookshelf tipped on its side. A few rotting textbooks scattered nearby. A teacher's desk, its drawers hanging open, filled with yellowed papers. In one classroom near the end of the hall, she found something that made her stop. A mural, painted directly on the wall, depicting children holding hands in a circle around a tree. The paint was faded and peeling, but the image was still visible. Beneath it, in careful cursive script, were the words, "Together, we grow." She stood there for a long time, staring at the mural, feeling something shift inside her. This place had meant something once. It had been loved. It had been a home. She was about to leave when she heard a noise from somewhere above her, a soft, scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. She froze, her heart hammering. The sound came again, louder this time, followed by a faint thud. Someone else was in the building. She backed toward the staircase, moving as quietly as she could. But before she reached it, a man's voice called out from the floor above. "Hello? Is someone down there?" Sarah didn't answer. She hurried down the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the empty hall, and didn't stop until she was outside, gasping for breath in the cold autumn air. She got in her car and locked the doors, her hands shaking. For several minutes, she just sat there, trying to calm her racing heart. When she finally looked up, she saw a man standing in one of the third-floor windows, watching her. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket, and though she couldn't see his face clearly from that distance, she had the distinct impression that he was smiling. She drove home without looking back. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the man in the window, about the way he had watched her. She told herself it was probably just a vagrant, someone using the building for shelter. But something about the encounter felt wrong. The way he had called out, as though he had been waiting for her. The way he had stood so still in the window, not moving, just watching. Saturday morning, she returned to the school with Maya. She had decided that if she was going to do this, she couldn't let fear stop her. Besides, in the daylight, with her daughter beside her, the place felt less menacing. They walked around the outside first, and Maya's excitement was infectious. "It's so big, Mommy," she said, her eyes wide. "Can we go inside?" "Just for a little while," Sarah said. "And you have to stay close to me. Some of the floors aren't safe." They entered through the same broken door at the back. Maya clung to her mother's hand, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's spooky," she said, "but kinda cool." They explored the first floor together, peeking into classrooms and offices. In the principal's office, Sarah found an old file cabinet, its drawers rusted shut. She tried to pry one open, but it wouldn't budge. In another room, they discovered a pile of old yearbooks, the pages yellowed and brittle. Maya picked one up and flipped through it, marveling at the black and white photographs of students from decades past. "Look, Mommy," she said, pointing to a photo of a girl with braids and a wide smile. "She looks like me." Sarah smiled, but as she looked around the room, a thought occurred to her. If the school had been abandoned for 15 years, why were there still personal items left behind? Yearbooks, files, even furniture that could have been salvaged. It was as though the place had been evacuated suddenly. I'd left exactly as it was, frozen in time. They were about to leave when Maya tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, what's that?" She was pointing to a door at the far end of the hall, half hidden behind a pile of debris. Sarah hadn't noticed it before. She moved closer and saw that it was made of heavy metal, with a small window of reinforced glass near the top. A sign on the door read, "Authorized personnel only." Sarah tried the handle, but it was locked. She peered through the window, but the glass was so dirty she could barely see anything. Just a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "It's probably just a basement," she said, though something about the door made her uneasy. Maya frowned. "Can we come back and look later?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Maybe. Come on, let's go." As they walked back through the building, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, but the hallways were empty. Still, the sensation persisted, prickling at the back of her neck. When they finally stepped outside, she felt a rush of relief, as though they had escaped something. On the drive home, Maya chattered excitedly about the school, making plans for how they could fix it up. But Sarah was only half listening. Her mind kept returning to that locked door and the staircase leading down into the dark. What was down there, and why had it been sealed off? Sunday afternoon, she received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a man's voice greeted her, smooth and professional. "Ms. Chen? My name is Robert Hargrove. I represent a private investment firm here in Greenfield. I understand you recently acquired the old Lincoln Elementary property." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "How did you get my number?" "Public records," he said easily. "Property sales are a matter of public record. I wanted to reach out to you because my clients have been looking for a property like yours for some time. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer." Sarah's stomach twisted. "I just bought it 2 days ago." Hargrove chuckled. "I know. And I'm sure you're realizing by now what a burden it is. $30,000 in back taxes and liens, not to mention the cost of demolition or renovation. That's a lot of money for someone in your position." The condescension in his tone made her jaw tighten. "What are you offering?" she asked, keeping her voice level. $50,000, he said. "Cash. We'll take care of all the paperwork and the city violations. You walk away with a profit, no strings attached." $50,000. The number hung in the air between them. It was more money than Sarah had ever seen in her life. It could pay off her debts, cover rent for years, give Maya a stable home. And yet, something about the offer felt wrong. Why would anyone pay $50,000 for a building that had been sold for $1 just 2 days ago? "I'll think about it," she said carefully. Hargrove's tone sharpened slightly. "Don't think too long, Ms. Chen. Opportunities like this don't come around often. I'll give you until the end of the week to decide." He hung up before she could respond. Sarah stood there, staring at her phone, a cold knot forming in her chest. $50,000 for a building worth nothing. Something was very wrong. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about the call. She pulled out the envelope from the county, spreading the documents across the kitchen table. Most of it was bureaucratic jargon, property descriptions, tax records, violation notices. But near the bottom of the stack, she found something else. A folded piece of paper, old and yellowed, that looked like it had been accidentally included. It was a letter, dated 1987, written in faded blue ink. The handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphic. "To whom it may concern," it began. "This letter serves as a record of the trust established by the estate of Margaret and Charles Lincoln, the original benefactors of Lincoln Elementary School. In accordance with their wishes, a perpetual fund has been created to ensure the school's continued operation and maintenance. The principal sum, held in trust by Greenfield Savings and Trust, is to be used exclusively for the benefit of the school and its students. Under no circumstances is the property to be sold or demolished without the express consent of the trust's administrator. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. A trust. There was a trust attached to the school. And if the trust still existed, that meant there was money. Potentially, a lot of money. She grabbed her laptop and began searching. The Greenfield Savings and Trust had closed in 2003, absorbed by a larger regional bank. But trusts didn't just disappear. They were legal entities, protected and managed according to the terms of the original agreement. Why, if the Lincoln Trust still existed, and if no one had claimed it, the funds could still be sitting in an account somewhere, untouched for decades. She stayed up until 3 in the morning, piecing together fragments of information. She found records of the Lincoln family, prominent landowners in Greenfield during the early 20th century. Margaret Lincoln had been a teacher, and Charles had made his fortune in railroads. They had no children, and when they died, they left their entire estate to the school they had helped build. But the trail went cold after that. The trust was mentioned in a few historical documents, but there was no record of what had happened to it after the bank closed. Monday morning, exhausted but determined, Sarah went to the public library and asked to see the archives. The librarian, a kind woman with silver hair, helped her navigate the old files. Together, they found more pieces of the puzzle. Tax records showing that the trust had paid the school's property taxes every year until 2008, when the payments suddenly stopped. A news article from 2009 mentioning the closure of the school, with a brief note that the Lincoln Trust had been dissolved due to administrative complications. But dissolved didn't mean the money was gone. It meant the trust had been closed, but the assets had to go somewhere. Sarah spent the rest of the day tracking down leads, calling banks, government offices, anyone who might have information. Most people didn't know what she was talking about. Some told her the records had been destroyed. But finally, late in the afternoon, she reached a clerk at the state comptroller's office who remembered something. "Oh, Lincoln Trust," the woman said slowly. "That name sounds familiar. Hold on." There was a long pause, the sound of typing. Then the woman's voice came back, cautious and uncertain. "According to our records, the assets of the Lincoln Trust were transferred to the state's unclaimed property division in 2010. The account has been dormant since then." Sarah's breath caught. "How much is in the account?" Another pause. "I can't give you that information over the phone. You'll need to file a claim with the division. But I can tell you that the last recorded balance was substantial." "How substantial?" Sarah pressed. The woman hesitated. "Several $100 million. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Several $100 million. She thanked the woman and hung up, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Several $100 million. Tied to the school. Tied to the property she had just bought for $1. No wonder someone was offering her $50,000 to walk away. She sat in her car outside the library, staring at nothing, trying to process what she had just learned. If the trust money still existed, and if she owned the property, did that mean she had a claim to it? She didn't know. She needed a lawyer, someone who understood trusts and estates. But lawyers cost money she didn't have, and if word got out about what she had discovered, people like Robert Hargrove would come out of the woodwork, trying to take it from her. That night, she lay awake, her mind racing. She thought about the locked door in the school, the staircase leading down into the dark. She thought about the man in the window, watching her, and she thought about the letter she had found, the careful handwriting, the words written by someone long dead. This letter serves as a record. A record of what? What else was hidden in that building? Tuesday morning, she called in sick to work again. She knew she couldn't keep doing this, but she had to know. She drove to the school and parked at the back, where her car would be less visible from the road. The air was colder now, the sky heavy with clouds. She took a deep breath and went inside. This time, she brought a flashlight and a crowbar she had borrowed from a neighbor. She went straight to the metal door. Up close, she could see that the lock was old, but solid. She wedged the crowbar into the gap between the door and the frame and pulled with all her strength. The metal groaned, then gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung open, revealing the narrow staircase she had seen through the window. The air that drifted up was cold and stale, with a faint chemical smell that made her nose wrinkle. She descended slowly, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The stairs were concrete, the walls bare and damp. At the bottom, she found herself in a long, narrow corridor lined with metal shelving units. Most of the shelves were empty, but a few still held boxes and files, their labels faded and illegible. She moved deeper into the space, her footsteps echoing softly. At the far end of the corridor, she found another door, this one unlocked. Beyond it was a small room, no bigger than a closet. And in the center of the room, sitting on a metal desk, was a safe. It was an old-fashioned safe, the kind with a dial and a heavy handle. The surface was scratched and dented, but it looked intact. Sarah set the flashlight on the desk and knelt in front of it. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. She sat back on her heels, staring at the safe, her mind whirling. What was inside? Documents? Money? The answers she was looking for? She picked up the flashlight and examined the safe more closely. There was a manufacturer's plate on the door, tarnished, but still readable. Milton & Sons, established 1920. And beneath it, scratched into the metal with something sharp, were 4 numbers. 1922. Sarah's heart skipped. 1922. The year the school was built. She spun the dial carefully, listening for the faint click of the tumblers. 1, 9, 2, 2. The mechanism clicked softly, and the handle turned. She pulled the door open, her breath catching. Inside, the safe was filled with papers, stacks and stacks of them, yellowed with age, but neatly organized. She pulled out the first bundle and unfolded it carefully. It was a ledger, handwritten, detailing deposits and withdrawals from an account labeled Lincoln Perpetual Fund. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of dollars in the 1920s, tens of thousands by the 1950s, hundreds of thousands by the 1980s. The final entry, dated December 2008, showed a balance of $326,457,893.12. Sarah stared at the number, unable to breathe. $326 million. She flipped through the other documents, bank statements, investment records, legal agreements, all of it meticulously preserved, hidden away in this forgotten basement. At the bottom of the stack, she found a sealed envelope with her name on it. Not typed, handwritten, in ink. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and the words written on it made her blood run cold. If you've found this, then you've come for what is yours. But be warned, others have been searching for this for a long time. They will not let you take it without a fight. Trust no one. Protect what you have found. And whatever you do, do not go to the police. ML. The initials at the bottom matched the ones she had seen carved into the wall upstairs. ML Margaret Lincoln. But Margaret Lincoln had died in 1985. Who had written this letter? And how did they know her name? Sarah's mind reeled. She gathered the documents and stuffed them into her bag, her movements frantic now. She had to get out of here. She had to figure out what to do. But as she turned to leave, she heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps. slow and deliberate, coming down the stairs. She switched off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it would give her away. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the faint glow of another flashlight beam sweeping across the corridor. A man's voice called out, low and calm. "I know you're down here, Miss Chen. There's no point in hiding." Sarah didn't move, didn't breathe. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. The beam of light swept across the doorway, lingering for a moment before moving on. Then, slowly, the footsteps receded, back up the stairs. She waited until she heard the metal door slam shut above her before daring to move. She climbed the stairs as quickly and quietly as she could, her legs shaking. When she reached the door, she found it had been locked from the outside. Panic surged through her. She was trapped. She pounded on the metal, shouting, but her voice was swallowed by the thick walls. No one would hear her. No one knew she was here. She sank to the floor, clutching her bag, the documents pressing against her chest. Outside, through the narrow window, she could see the shadows lengthening as the afternoon faded into evening. And somewhere above her, in the empty halls of the old school, someone was waiting. Sarah sat with her back against the cold metal door, her mind racing through options. The bag with the documents pressed against her side, heavy with the weight of what she had discovered. $326 million. The number seemed impossible, surreal, like something from a dream she would wake from at any moment. But the ache in her legs from sitting on the concrete stairs and the metallic taste of fear in her mouth told her this was very real. She pulled out her phone. No signal. The thick walls and underground location made that inevitable. She was completely cut off. Maya would be getting out of school in 2 hours. If Sarah wasn't there to pick her up, her daughter would wait at the after-school program, but only until 6 o'clock. After that, they would call emergency services. The thought of Maya scared and alone made Sarah's chest tighten with panic. She stood up and examined the door more carefully. It was solid steel, the kind designed to withstand forced entry. The hinges were on the outside, making it impossible to remove them from her side. But the frame around the door was old wood, rotting in places from years of moisture damage. She pulled the crowbar from her bag and began working it into the gap between the frame and the wall. The wood splintered slowly, chunks falling away as she pried and twisted. Her arms burned with effort, and sweat dripped down her back despite the cold. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, she had created a gap wide enough to see through. On the other side, the hallway was empty, lit by the gray afternoon light filtering through broken windows. She worked faster now, desperation lending her strength. Finally, with a groaning crack, a section of the frame gave way entirely, and the door swung inward just enough for her to squeeze through. She emerged into the hallway, gasping, her hands bleeding from splinters. The building was silent except for the sound of wind whistling through broken glass. She moved quickly toward the back exit, clutching her bag to her chest. Every shadow made her flinch. Every creak of settling wood made her heart leap. When she finally burst through the door into the fading daylight, she ran to her car without looking back. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. As the engine started, she glanced up at the third-floor windows. There, in the same window where she had seen the man before, a figure stood watching. But this time, she could see him more clearly. He wasn't a vagrant. He wore a dark suit, and even from this distance, she could see the phone pressed to his ear. He was making a call. About her. Sarah drove away faster than she should have, her tires throwing gravel as she turned onto the main road. She didn't slow down until she was back in town, surrounded by traffic and people. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She picked Maya up from school and tried to act normal, but her daughter noticed immediately. "Mommy, your hands," Maya said, staring at the cuts and scratches. What happened?" "I was working on the building," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Just some old wood. Nothing serious." That night, after Maya was asleep, Sarah spread the documents across the kitchen table and began to read through them carefully. The trust had been established in 1922 with an initial deposit of $50,000, an enormous sum at the time. Margaret and Charles Lincoln had intended it to fund the school in perpetuity, with the interest paying for operations and maintenance while the principal continued to grow. And grow it had. Over the decades, the trustees had invested conservatively but wisely. By the 1950s, the trust held over $1 million. By the 1980s, it had grown to nearly $40 million. And then, in the 1990s, someone had made a series of remarkably successful investments in technology stocks. By 2000, the trust was worth over $200 million. The financial crisis of 2008 had barely touched it because the portfolio was so well diversified. The final balance, recorded just before the trust was transferred to the state, was $326,457,893.12. But there was something else in the documents, a clause that Sarah had almost missed. It stated that if the school ever closed or the property was sold, the trust funds would revert to the legal owner of the Lincoln Elementary property to be used for the benefit of education and community welfare in Greenfield County. Sarah read the clause 3 times, her heart pounding. She was the legal owner now, which meant, if she could prove it, the money was hers. She found the letter again, the one addressed to her in handwriting that shouldn't exist. "Trust no one," it said. "Don't go to the police." Why? Who had written this? And how had they known she would find it? The questions spiraled in her mind, unanswerable and unsettling. She locked the documents in a small, fireproof box she kept under her bed, then lay awake for hours, listening to every sound in the building, jumping at every creak of settling boards. The next morning, Robert Hargrove called again. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice even smoother than before. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation. Have you had a chance to consider my offer?" Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm still thinking about it," she said carefully. There was a pause. "I understand you've been spending quite a bit of time at the property," Hargrove said. "I hope you're being careful. Old buildings can be dangerous. Accidents happen." The threat in his words was barely veiled. Sarah felt her anger rise, pushing back the fear. "Is that a threat, Mr. Hargrove?" He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Not at all. I'm simply concerned for your safety. These old structures, they're not stable. Just yesterday, I heard about a woman who fell through a rotten floor in a condemned building. Terrible tragedy. And she was trapped for hours before anyone found her." Sarah's blood ran cold. He knew she had been trapped in the basement, which meant he was the one who had locked her in, or he was working with whoever had. "I'll be fine," she said, keeping her voice steady. "And I'm not selling." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anger. These people, whoever they were, thought they could intimidate her, thought she would just roll over and give up because she was poor and alone and had no power. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Sarah had been poor her entire life. She had survived an abusive relationship, homelessness, 2 years of sleeping in her car with a baby. She had worked 3 jobs while pregnant, studied for her GED at night, and put herself through a semester of community college before money ran out. She had learned how to survive when the world gave her nothing but obstacles, and she had learned that the only person who would fight for her was herself. She called the state comptroller's office and asked to speak to someone about unclaimed property. After being transferred 3 times, she reached a woman named Carol, who sounded both bored and suspicious. "I'm calling about the Lincoln Trust," Sarah said. "I believe I have a claim to it." Carol's tone shifted immediately. "The Lincoln Trust? That file has been dormant for over a decade. What makes you think you have a claim?" "I own the property," Sarah said. "Lincoln Elementary School. I purchased it at a county auction last week. According to the trust documents, our ownership of the property entitles me to the trust funds." There was a long silence. "Ms. Chen," Carol said slowly, "do you have any idea how much money we're talking about?" $326 million, Sarah said, "give or take." Another silence, longer this time. "You need to come to the office," Carol said finally. "And you need to bring proof of ownership, the trust documents, and any other supporting materials you have. But I have to warn you, a claim this large will require extensive verification. It could take months, and there will be people who contest it." "I understand," Sarah said. "When can I come?" They scheduled an appointment for the following Monday. Sarah spent the weekend making copies of everything, storing the originals in 3 different locations: the fireproof box under her bed, so a safety deposit box she rented at a bank across town, and with a friend from the diner she trusted implicitly. On Saturday afternoon, she told Lisa everything. Her friend listened in stunned silence as Sarah laid out the documents on the table of Lisa's small apartment. When Sarah finished, Lisa just stared at her, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her mouth. $300 million, Lisa said finally. "Sarah, I don't even know what to say. That's generational wealth. That's never working again money. If I can claim it," Sarah said, "and if I can survive long enough to see it through." She told Lisa about Hargrove, about being locked in the basement, about the threats. Lisa's face darkened. "You need protection," she said. "You need a lawyer, maybe security." "I can't afford any of that," Sarah said. "No, not yet." Lisa thought for a moment, then picked up her phone. "My cousin's husband is a lawyer. He does some pro bono work. Let me call him." The lawyer's name was David Park, and he agreed to meet with Sarah that evening. He was younger than she expected, probably in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a calm, methodical way of speaking. He reviewed the documents carefully, taking notes, asking questions. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "This is legitimate," he said. "The trust exists, the clause is clear, and you have legal ownership of the property. In theory, you have a valid claim." "In theory?" Sarah asked. David set down his pen. "In theory, this is straightforward. But in practice, you're about to go up against people who have been trying to access this money for years. The state will fight you because they've been managing the funds. The county will fight you because they sold you the property without disclosing the trust. And whoever these private investors are, they'll fight you because they want the money for themselves." Sarah felt the hope that had been building in her chest begin to crumble. "So I can't win?" David shook his head. "I didn't say that. I said it will be a fight. But the law is on your side. And if you're willing to see this through, I'll help you. Pro bono." He smiled slightly. "I don't get many cases where the underdog actually has the better hand. This will be fun." Over the next few days, David filed the official claim with the state and began building their case. Sarah continued working at the diner, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but word was beginning to spread. She didn't know how, probably through someone at the county office or the comptroller's office, but people in Greenfield were starting to talk. She overheard conversations at the diner, whispers that stopped when she approached. "Did you hear about that woman who bought the old school? She thinks she's entitled to some trust fund or something. Probably a scam. She'll end up in jail." The gossip stung, but Sarah kept her head down and focused on what mattered. Then, one morning, she found a note taped to her car windshield. It was typed, anonymous, and chilling. Drop the claim. You don't know what you're getting into. This is your only warning. She showed it to David, who immediately advised her to file a police report. But when she went to the station, the officer who took her statement was dismissive. It's probably just a prank, he said, barely glancing at the note. You've been in the news. People get weird ideas. I've been threatened, Sarah said, her voice rising. Someone locked me in a basement. Someone knows where I live. The officer sighed. Miss Chen, unless you have proof of who did this, there's not much we can do. We'll keep the note on file, but I can't assign protection based on an anonymous threat. Sarah left the station furious and more afraid than before. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every car that passed on the street outside made her sit up in bed. Every creak of the building made her reach for her phone. She checked on Maya 3 times just to make sure her daughter was still breathing, still safe. The hearing for her claim was scheduled for early December, just 2 weeks away. In the meantime, strange things started happening. Her hours at the diner were suddenly cut. No explanation given. The landlord called to say he needed her out by the end of November after all, not December as originally agreed. Someone slashed her tires one night while she was at work. When she called David to tell him, he sounded concerned. They're trying to pressure you, he said, make you desperate enough to give up. It's working, Sarah admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how much more of this I can take. You're stronger than you think, David said, and you're not alone. I'm filing for an emergency restraining order against Hargrove and his company. It won't stop everything, but it will send a message that you're serious. The restraining order was granted, but it didn't stop the harassment. A few days later, Sarah received a formal letter from a law firm representing Claymore Holdings. It claimed that the property sale had been improper, that the county had failed to disclose encumbrances, and that Sarah's purchase should be voided. It demanded she vacate the property immediately and threatened legal action if she refused. David called her after reviewing the letter. It's a scare tactic, he said. They have no grounds to void the sale, but they're going to drag this out as long as they can, hoping you'll run out of money for legal fees, or just give up. How much will this cost? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. If it goes to trial, tens of thousands, maybe more. Sarah closed her eyes. She didn't have thousands. She barely had hundreds. That night, Maya asked her a question that broke her heart. Mommy, why are people being mean to you? Sarah pulled her daughter close. Because they want something I have, she said. And they think if they're mean enough, I'll just give it to them. Maya looked up at her, her dark eyes serious. Are you going to? Sarah shook her head. No, baby, I'm not. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't afford to keep waiting, couldn't afford to let these people slowly grind her down. She needed to go public, needed to tell her story before they could bury it. She called the local newspaper, the Greenfield Gazette, and asked to speak to a reporter. The woman who answered, Rachel Torres, was intrigued. They met at a coffee shop that afternoon, and Sarah told her everything. The auction, the trust, the threats, the attempts to force her off the property. Rachel listened, taking notes, her expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. This is big, she said when Sarah finished. If what you're saying is true, this is a story about corruption, hidden wealth, and a system that failed to protect what should have been public knowledge. Can you help me? Sarah asked. Rachel nodded. I'll start investigating. But Sarah, you need to be prepared. Once this goes public, things are going to get worse before they get better. The article ran the following Sunday front page with the headline, Single Mother Discovers $326 million. Trust after buying abandoned school for $1. Within hours, it had been picked up by regional news outlets. By Monday morning, it was national news. And Sarah's phone rang constantly with interview requests, legal offers, and threats. She stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The attention was overwhelming, but it also brought support. People from all over the country sent messages of encouragement. Local residents began showing up at the diner to shake her hand and tell her they were rooting for her. But the opposition intensified as well. Claymore Holdings filed a lawsuit. The county threatened her with fines for not addressing the building violations. And Hargrove appeared on a local news segment, smooth and convincing, claiming that Sarah was trying to exploit a legal loophole to steal public funds. "This money was intended for the community," he said, looking directly at the camera, "not for one person's private gain." Sarah watched the interview from her apartment, her hands clenched into fists. He was good. He made her sound like the villain. The hearing was now just days away. David worked around the clock, preparing their case, but he was honest with her about their chances. "We have the law on our side," he said. "But the other side has money, connections, and time. They're going to fight dirty." The night before the hearing, Sarah couldn't eat. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the documents she had memorized by now, and tried to imagine what would happen tomorrow. She thought about the judge, about the lawyers on the other side, about the possibility that she could lose everything. And then she thought about Maya, about the life her daughter deserved, and about all the times she had promised herself she would give her baby a better world. That was worth fighting for. That was worth risking everything for. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, in the same room where Sarah had bought the property just a few weeks ago. But this time, the room was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras clicking constantly. Lawyers from the state, the county, and Claymore Holdings sat at one long table, their expensive suits and leather briefcases radiating confidence. Sarah sat beside David at a much smaller table, feeling small and out of place in her thrift store dress. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened as the lawyers from the other side presented their arguments. They claimed the trust was public property, that Sarah's purchase of the school didn't entitle her to the funds, that the clause in the trust document was outdated and unenforceable. They spoke for over an hour, citing precedents and statutes, their voices confident and rehearsed. Then it was David's turn. He stood slowly, gathering his notes, and Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. This was it. Everything depended on the next few minutes. David began quietly, methodically laying out the facts. The trust had been established with specific terms. Those terms stated that if the school closed or the property was sold, the funds would go to the legal owner. Sarah was the legal owner, having purchased the property at a legal auction. The county had failed to disclose the trust, but that didn't invalidate her claim. It simply meant the county had made a mistake. He presented the documents, the bank records, the letters from Margaret Lincoln. He showed how the trust had been managed for decades, how the money had grown, and how it had been transferred to the state only because no one had claimed it. "But someone is claiming it now," David said, his voice growing stronger. "Someone who has a legal right to it. Someone who followed the law, who bought a property no one else wanted, and who discovered what was hidden there through her own effort." He turned to face the judge directly. "Your Honor, this isn't about taking public money. This is about honoring the wishes of the people who created the trust. Margaret and Charles Lincoln wanted this money to support education in Greenfield. They put safeguards in place to ensure it would be used properly. And they specified that if the school ever closed, the money should go to the person who owned the property. That person is Sarah Chen." The room was silent. The judge looked down at her notes, then back at David. "Mr. Park," she said, You're asking this court to award over $300 million to a woman who paid $1 for a building. Do you understand how that looks?" David nodded. "I do, Your Honor. It looks like exactly what it is. Someone finding something valuable that everyone else had overlooked. That's not exploitation. That's just very good luck." A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. The judge didn't smile, but Sarah thought she saw something soften in her expression. "I'll take this under advisement," the judge said. "I'll issue a ruling within 30 days. And that was it. The hearing was over. Sarah walked out of the courthouse into the cold December air, feeling numb. 30 days. 30 more days of not knowing, of waiting, of watching her life hang in the balance. That night, as she tucked Maya into bed, her daughter asked, "Did you win, Mommy?" Sarah smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "I don't know yet, baby, but I tried my best." Maya nodded sleepily. "That's what you always tell me to do. Try your best." Sarah kissed her forehead and turned out the light. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and sat at the table, staring at nothing. She had done everything she could. Now, all she could do was wait. The days that followed were agonizing. Every morning, she woke up wondering if today would be the day the judge issued her ruling. Every phone call made her jump. She tried to keep busy, working her shifts at the diner, spending time with Maya, avoiding the news and social media, where people debated her case endlessly. Some called her a hero. Others called her a thief. Most just called her lucky. But luck, Sarah knew, was a strange thing. Was it lucky to be born poor? To struggle every day just to survive? To have to fight for scraps while others lived in comfort? Maybe finding the trust was lucky. But everything else in her life had been hard-earned, fought for, survived. 2 weeks after the hearing, David called. His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "Sarah," he said, "the judge issued her ruling." Sarah's heart stopped. "And?" There was a pause, and then David laughed. Actually laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy. "You won," he said. "You won everything." Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She sat down hard on the edge of her bed, the phone pressed to her ear. "Say that again," she whispered. "You won," David repeated. "The judge ruled in your favor. The trust funds are yours. All of it. $326 million. Congratulations, Sarah. You're a very wealthy woman." The phone slipped from Sarah's hand. She stared at the wall, tears streaming down her face, unable to process what she had just heard. $326 million. Hers. Really, truly hers. Maya ran into the room, alarmed by her mother's tears. "Mommy, what's wrong?" Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her so tight Maya squeaked in protest. "Nothing's wrong, baby," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Everything's right. Everything's finally right." And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Sarah Chen allowed herself to believe it. The news spread fast. Within an hour of David's call, reporters were already gathering outside Sarah's apartment building. She could see them from her window, cameras and microphones at the ready, waiting for her to emerge. The local news vans arrived first, then the regional stations, and finally the national networks. By evening, the sidewalk was crowded with journalists from as far away as New York and Los Angeles, all wanting to interview the woman who had turned $1 into $326 million. Sarah stayed inside, holding Maya close, watching the circus unfold below. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages. Congratulations from people she barely knew. Interview requests, investment opportunities, lawyers offering their services, distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years, suddenly remembering they existed. She turned off her phone and just sat there, trying to let the reality sink in. She was wealthy, not comfortable, not well off, wealthy beyond anything she had ever imagined. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning through the implications. She could pay off her debts, all of them. The medical bills from Maya's appendectomy, the credit card debt she had been carrying for years, the student loans from her single semester of community college. She could buy a house, a real house with a yard where Maya could play. She could buy a car that didn't break down every other month. She could quit the diner. She could go back to school. She could give Maya everything she had always dreamed of giving her. But beneath the joy and relief, there was something else. Fear, not of losing the money, but of what it might do to them. She had spent her entire life knowing exactly who she was, a survivor, a fighter, someone who made do with what little she had. What would she be now? Who would she become? And more importantly, how would she make sure Maya didn't lose herself in all of this? The next morning, David called again. "We need to talk about next steps," he said. "The money will be transferred to an escrow account within 72 hours. You'll need to set up a proper financial structure, tax attorneys, wealth managers, the works. And Sarah, you need to be prepared. This is going to change everything." "I know," Sarah said quietly. They met at David's office later that day. He had assembled a team of financial advisors, accountants, and attorneys, all of whom treated Sarah with a deference that made her uncomfortable. They spoke in jargon she didn't understand, throwing around terms like trusts and foundations and tax-advantaged vehicles. It was overwhelming, and halfway through the meeting, Sarah had to excuse herself to the bathroom just to breathe. When she returned, David pulled her aside. "I know this is a lot," he said gently, "but these people are here to help you. They're going to make sure you don't lose this money to taxes or bad investments or people trying to take advantage of you. You need to trust them." Sarah nodded, but the word trust felt heavy. She had spent so long trusting no one but herself that the idea of handing over control to strangers felt dangerous. Over the next week, Sarah learned more about money than she had in her entire life. She learned about tax implications, the difference between income and capital gains, how to structure charitable donations to maximize impact and minimize liability. She learned about investment portfolios, diversification, and risk management. The advisors recommended she establish a private foundation to manage the funds, with herself as the primary director. That way, she could ensure the money was used according to the original intent of the trust, supporting education and community welfare in Greenfield, while also providing for herself and Maya. The foundation would be called the Chen Educational Foundation, honoring both the people who had created the trust and the family who had finally claimed it. Sarah liked that. It felt right, like a bridge between the past and the future. But even as she signed documents and made decisions, she felt disconnected from it all, as though it were happening to someone else. The vindication she had expected to feel didn't come immediately. Instead, she felt numb, going through the motions while her mind struggled to catch up with reality. It wasn't until she walked into the diner for what she thought would be her last shift that the weight of what had happened truly hit her. Her co-workers greeted her with hugs and tears. Lisa held her for a long time, whispering, "You did it. You actually did it." The owner, a gruff man named Tom, who had never shown much emotion in the 5 years Sarah had worked there, pulled her aside. "I heard what happened," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry about cutting your hours. I got a call from someone claiming to be from the health department. Team said they were investigating the place, and that you were the one who reported us. I know now it was all bullshit, just someone trying to mess with you." Sarah's chest tightened. "It's okay, Tom. I understand." He shook his head. "It's not okay. I should have trusted you. You've been nothing but reliable all these years. I let some stranger on the phone turn me against you, and I'm ashamed of that." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. "This is what I owe you for the hours you should have worked. It's not much, but it's yours." Sarah looked at the envelope and then back at Tom. "Keep it," she said. "Use it for a Christmas bonus for the others. They deserve it more than I do." Tom's eyes widened. "Sarah, you don't have to. I know," she said, smiling. "But I want to." That afternoon, when she went to the landlord's office, Mr. Kendrick, a thin man with a perpetual frown, looked surprised to see her. "Mrs. Chen," he said warily, "I wasn't expecting you." "I wanted to talk about the eviction," Sarah said. "I know you said you needed me out by the end of the month." Kendrick shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm sorry about the short notice. Someone made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They wanted the whole building, said they'd pay double the market rate if I cleared everyone out by December." "Let me guess," Sarah said. "A company called Claymore Holdings?" Kendrick blinked. "How did you know?" Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "They were trying to pressure me, make me homeless so I'd be desperate enough to give up something they wanted. But it didn't work." She reached into her bag and pulled out a checkbook, and one of many the bank had provided when they set up her accounts. "I'd like to buy the building from you. Whatever they offered, I'll pay triple." Kendrick's jaw dropped. "Ms. Chen, that would be— I know exactly what it would be," Sarah said calmly. "Do we have a deal?" 20 minutes later, Sarah walked out of the office as the owner of her apartment building. It felt strange, surreal, but also deeply satisfying. She called David immediately. "I just bought my apartment building," she said. David was silent for a moment. "Sarah, we talked about this. You need to be strategic with your purchases. Real estate is fine, but you should consult with your financial team first." "I know," Sarah said, "but this was personal. The people in this building, they're my neighbors. Some of them have lived here for decades. They were all going to be evicted because of me, because someone was trying to hurt me. I couldn't let that happen." David sighed, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "Okay, just promise me you'll run any other major purchases by me first." "I promise," Sarah said. That evening, she knocked on the doors of her neighbors and told them the news. No one was being evicted. In fact, she was lowering everyone's rent by 20%, effective immediately. The reactions ranged from disbelief to tears of relief. An elderly woman named Mrs. Garcia, who lived in the apartment below Sarah's, hugged her so tightly Sarah could barely breathe. "You're an angel," Mrs. Garcia whispered. "A real angel sent from heaven." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not an angel. I'm just someone who got really, really lucky." But Mrs. Garcia wouldn't hear it. "Well, luck is what you make of it, mija. Plenty of people get lucky and forget where they came from. You didn't forget. That's what makes you special." The words stayed with Sarah long after Mrs. Garcia had returned to her apartment. She realized that was what she was most afraid of, forgetting. Forgetting what it felt like to count pennies at the grocery store. Forgetting the terror of opening bills she couldn't pay. Forgetting the exhaustion of working double shifts just to keep a roof over her daughter's head. She never wanted to forget those things, because they had made her who she was. The following week, the money was officially transferred. Sarah's bank account, which had never held more than a few $100s at a time, suddenly showed a balance that looked like a phone number. She stared at the screen for a long time, unable to quite believe it was real. The first thing she did was pay off every debt she had: medical bills, credit cards, student loans, even the $50 she had borrowed from Lisa 3 months ago. Then she set up college funds for Maya and for Lisa's 2 kids. Then she donated $100,000 to the food bank, where she had once stood in line, waiting for boxes of canned goods and day-old bread. She bought a house, not a mansion, but a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a safe neighborhood with good schools. It had a backyard with a swing set, and a front porch where she could sit with her morning coffee. When she showed it to Maya, her daughter ran through every room, her laughter echoing off the empty walls. "This is really ours?" Maya asked, her eyes wide. "Really, truly ours," Sarah confirmed. "No landlord. It's like no eviction notices. This is home." But the most important thing Sarah did was return to the school. The old Lincoln Elementary building still stood at the edge of town, broken and forgotten. She hired a team of contractors and architects, the best in the state, and told them she wanted to restore it. Not just repair it, but restore it to its former glory. The goal was to turn it into a community center, with after-school programs for kids, adult education classes, job training, and resources for families struggling with poverty. The renovation took 6 months. Sarah visited the site almost every day, watching as the broken windows were replaced, the roof rebuilt, the classrooms transformed. She salvaged what she could from the original building, the chalkboards, the wooden floors, even the mural she had found that first day. Together we grow. She had it professionally restored and hung in the main lobby, a reminder of what the building had once been and what it would be again. During those months, Sarah also dealt with the fallout from her victory. Claymore Holdings and Robert Hargrove faced investigations for fraud, intimidation, and attempted theft. It turned out they had been trying to access the Lincoln Trust for years, using shell companies and legal loopholes. They had known about the trust all along, had been waiting for the right moment to claim it. When the school was finally put up for auction, they had assumed no one else would be interested. Sarah's purchase had been an unexpected complication, one they had tried to eliminate through threats and manipulation. Hargrove was eventually charged with multiple counts of fraud and harassment. He was disbarred and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Sarah felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet sense of justice. The county officials who had failed to disclose the trust were fired or forced to resign. A full audit revealed decades of mismanagement and corruption, not just with the Lincoln Trust, but with other public assets as well. The scandal rocked Greenfield for months. Through it all, Sarah stayed focused on what mattered: the school, her daughter, the community. She established scholarship programs for low-income students. She funded after-school tutoring and mentorship initiatives. She partnered with local businesses to create job training programs for people trying to escape poverty. Every decision she made was guided by one question: what would have helped me when I was struggling? The grand reopening of the Lincoln Chen Community Center took place on a warm spring morning, almost exactly 1 year after Sarah had bought the school for $1. The entire town turned out for the event. There were speeches from the mayor, the superintendent of schools, and several community leaders. But when it was Sarah's turn to speak, she found herself overwhelmed by emotion. She stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and saw faces she recognized. Tom from the diner, Mrs. Garcia from her old building, Lisa and her kids, the librarian who had helped her research the trust, David Park, who had fought for her when she had nothing, and Maya, sitting in the front row, beaming with pride. Sarah took a deep breath and began. When I bought this building a year ago, I had no idea what I was getting into. I just knew I needed a chance, an opportunity to give my daughter a better life. I didn't know there was a fortune hidden here. I didn't know it would change everything. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But the real fortune wasn't the money. It was the lesson this building taught me. That sometimes the things everyone else has given up on are the things most worth fighting for. That what looks like ruin on the outside can hold something precious on the inside. And that the people who are struggling, who are overlooked, who are dismissed by society, they're the ones who understand the true value of things. Her voice grew stronger. Margaret and Charles Lincoln built this school, because they believed in education. They believed in giving people chances. And when they created that trust, they weren't just setting aside money. They were making a statement. They were saying that education matters, that community matters, that the most important investment we can make is in each other. She looked down at Maya, who was wiping tears from her eyes. I'm going to honor that legacy. This center will be a place where anyone can come, regardless of their circumstances, and find support. Whether you're a kid who needs help with homework, a parent looking for job training, or a senior citizen who just wants somewhere to spend the afternoon, you're welcome here. This is your building. This is your community. The crowd erupted in applause. People stood, cheering, some crying. Sarah stepped back from the podium, her own eyes wet with tears, and watched as Maya ran up to the stage and hugged her. I'm so proud of you, Mommy, Maya whispered. Sarah held her daughter close and whispered back, I'm proud of us. After the ceremony, Sarah walked through the building one last time before the crowds arrived for the open house. The hallways were bright and clean now, painted in warm colors that made the space feel welcoming. The classrooms had been converted into multi-purpose rooms, equipped with computers, books, and supplies. The gymnasium had been restored, its hardwood floor gleaming. And in the basement, where she had once been trapped in darkness, there was now a bright, modern library, filled with books and comfortable chairs. She stopped in front of the mural in the lobby. Together, we grow. She traced the words with her finger, thinking about how far she had come. A year ago, she had been on the edge of homelessness, working exhausting hours for barely enough to survive, with no hope that things would ever get better. Now she had more money than she could spend in a lifetime, but the money wasn't what had changed her. It was the journey, the fight, the realization that she was stronger than she had ever known. As the weeks and months passed, Sarah settled into her new life. She remained surprisingly grounded, despite her wealth. She still drove a modest car, though it was new and reliable. She still shopped at the same grocery store, though she no longer had to choose between paying for food or paying for rent. She still had dinner with Lisa at least once a week, though now they ate at nice restaurants instead of Lisa's kitchen table. And she still volunteered at the community center, teaching financial literacy classes to people who reminded her of her former self. Maya thrived. She enrolled in a better school, made new friends, and discovered a love for art that Sarah encouraged with classes and supplies. But more than the material changes, Maya seemed lighter somehow, as though a weight had been lifted from her small shoulders. She no longer worried about her mother the way she once had, no longer saw the stress lines around her eyes or heard the exhaustion in her voice. She was just a kid now, free to be a kid, and that was the greatest gift Sarah could have given her. One evening, about 18 months after the court ruling, Sarah received a letter. It was handwritten on expensive paper with no return address. Inside was a single sheet, covered in the same elegant handwriting she had seen on the note in the safe. Dear Sarah, it read, You don't know me, Wacko, but I've been watching your journey with great interest. I'm writing to tell you that you were chosen, not by accident, not by luck, but by design. Sarah's hands trembled as she continued reading. My name is not important. What matters is that I was the last trustee of the Lincoln Trust, appointed by Margaret Lincoln herself before she died. She made me promise that when the right person finally claimed the inheritance, I would make sure they understood something important. The money was never the point. The point was finding someone who would use it the way she intended. Someone who knew what it meant to struggle. Someone who wouldn't forget where they came from. The letter continued. I've been searching for that person for 30 years. I watched as greedy developers tried to access the funds. I watched as corrupt officials tried to steal them. I made sure the school was sold in a way that would attract the right buyer. And when you walked into that auction, when you raised your hand to bid on a building no one else wanted, I knew I had found what I was looking for. Sarah read the words again, her mind reeling. The note you found in the safe, the one with your name on it? I wrote that the day after you bought the property. I knew you would find it eventually. I knew because you were the kind of person who would search every corner, who would dig until you uncovered the truth. That's why Margaret wanted someone like you. Because only someone who has known hardship can truly understand the value of opportunity. The letter ended with a simple message. You've done well, Sarah. Better than I could have hoped. The trust is in good hands now. Use it wisely. Use it kindly. And never forget that the real treasure was never the money. It was the strength you found in yourself to claim it. Yours in faith, M.L. Sarah set the letter down, her heart racing. M.L., not Margaret Lincoln, who had died decades ago, but someone else with the same initials, someone who had been watching, guiding, ensuring the trust fulfilled its purpose. She would never know who they were, but somehow, that felt right. Some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. 2 years after her life had changed, Sarah stood in the backyard of her home, watching Maya play on the swing set. It was a warm summer evening, the kind where the light turns golden and the air smells like grass and possibility. She thought about everything that had happened, all the fear and struggle and ultimate triumph. She thought about the people who had tried to take what was hers and the people who had helped her fight for it. She thought about the weight of $1 and the weight of 326 million. But most of all, she thought about the question that had haunted her from the beginning. Who would she become? And now, finally, she had an answer. She was still Sarah Chen, still the woman who had counted pennies and worked double shifts and fought for every scrap of dignity. The money hadn't changed that. It had just given her the tools to be a better version of herself, a version that could help others the way she had once needed help, a version that could look at a broken-down building and see not ruins, but possibility. Maya called out to her, laughing as the swing carried her higher. Sarah smiled and waved back, feeling a peace she had never known before. This was what Margaret Lincoln had wanted, not wealth for its own sake, but wealth as a means to lift others up, to create opportunity where there had been none, to prove that sometimes the most unlikely person is exactly the right person. She had started with nothing but $1 and a dream. She had faced threats, doubt, and opposition. But she had persevered. And in doing so, she had discovered something more valuable than any amount of money. She had discovered that she was worth fighting for. The community center continued to thrive, serving hundreds of families every year. The scholarship program sent dozens of students to college. The job training initiatives helped people escape poverty and build better lives. And every time Sarah walked through those restored hallways, past that mural with its message of growth and unity, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This was her legacy. Not the money, but what she had done with it. Years later, when Maya was grown and had children of her own, she would tell them the story about how her mother bought a school for $1 and found a fortune, about how that fortune changed their lives and the lives of countless others, about how the greatest treasures are sometimes hidden in the places everyone else has abandoned, and about how the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with what they're given. But that was still in the future. On this summer evening, Sarah was content to simply be present, to watch her daughter play, to feel the grass beneath her feet and the warmth of the sun on her face, to know that they were safe, secure, and surrounded by love. She had won. Not just the legal battle, not just the money. She had won the right to live without fear, to give her daughter everything she had never had, and to help others find their own hidden fortunes, whatever form they might take. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah whispered a quiet thank you to Margaret Lincoln, to the mysterious ML who had guided her journey, and to herself for being brave enough to take a chance on a broken-down building when everyone else saw only ruins. Because sometimes the things that look worthless hold the greatest value. Sometimes a single dollar can change everything. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who will surprise them all. The first time Sarah went grocery shopping after the money transferred, she stood frozen in the cereal aisle for almost 10 minutes. Maya tugged at her sleeve, asking why they weren't moving, but Sarah couldn't find the words to explain. For years, grocery shopping had been a careful calculation. She would stand in this exact spot, comparing unit prices, calculating which box would last longest, sometimes putting things back when she realized she had miscalculated her budget. But now, with more money than she could comprehend sitting in her bank account, the old habit refused to break. Her hand still reached for the cheapest option, her mind still automatically adding up totals, her body still tensed with the familiar anxiety of whether her card would be declined at checkout. "Mommy, can we get the one with the toy inside?" Maya asked, pointing to a brightly colored box that cost twice as much as the store brand. Sarah looked at her daughter, then at the expensive cereal, then back at her daughter. Something inside her cracked, not painfully, but like ice melting after a long winter. "Yes," she said, her voice catching. "We can get whatever you want." They filled the cart that day with things Sarah had never allowed herself to buy: fresh berries instead of frozen, name-brand crackers, real maple syrup, a bouquet of flowers just because they were pretty. At the checkout, when the total came to over $200, Sarah's hand still shook as she handed over her card. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the strangeness of not being afraid. The cashier, a young woman Sarah had seen dozens of times over the years, looked at the receipt and then at Sarah. "Big shopping trip today," she said conversationally. Sarah just nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she loaded bags into her car, she sat in the driver's seat and cried, not from sadness, but from the release of a tension she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. Maya climbed into the back seat and asked, "Why are you sad, Mommy?" Sarah wiped her eyes and turned to face her daughter. "I'm not sad, baby. I'm just remembering what it felt like to be scared, so I never forget." The money brought unexpected complications. Within days of the news going public, Sarah's phone was flooded with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years. Childhood friends who had drifted away suddenly wanted to reconnect. An aunt who had never acknowledged Maya's existence sent a long email explaining how family should stick together. Her ex-boyfriend, Maya's father, who had disappeared before their daughter was born, somehow tracked down her number and called, his voice dripping with false warmth as he congratulated her and suggested they should talk about co-parenting. Sarah blocked his number without responding. But each message, each call, each suddenly interested relative felt like a small betrayal. Where had these people been when she was sleeping in her car? When she was choosing between feeding Maya and paying the electric bill? When she was so exhausted from working 3 jobs that she would cry in the bathroom during her breaks? Their sudden appearance now, when she no longer needed them, revealed exactly who they were. And Sarah made a quiet promise to herself to remember that too. But there were also genuine connections that deepened in unexpected ways. David Park became more than just her lawyer. As they worked through the complex process of establishing the foundation, they spent countless hours together, and Sarah discovered that beneath his professional exterior was a man who genuinely cared about justice. He had grown up poor too, the son of Korean immigrants who had worked themselves to exhaustion running a dry cleaning business. He understood what it meant to fight for every opportunity, to prove yourself twice as hard because the world expected you to fail. One evening, after a particularly long meeting with the foundation board, David drove Sarah home. They sat in his car outside her new house, neither of them quite ready to end the conversation. "Can I ask you something?" David said. "Why did you buy your old apartment building? Your advisors were right. It wasn't a smart investment. The neighborhood's rough. The building needed work. You could have bought property anywhere." Sarah looked out at her front porch, where a light glowed warm and welcoming. "Because those people were going to lose their homes because of me," she said. "Because Mrs. Garcia, who lives below my old apartment, she baked me cookies when I had nothing to eat. Because the single dad on the third floor once gave me $50 when my car broke down, and I know he needed that money more than I did. I couldn't just walk away from them." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So my parents would have liked you." The way he said it, the past tense, told Sarah everything she needed to know. She reached over and squeezed his hand. They sat there in comfortable silence, two people who understood that some things mattered more than money. Over the following months, David would become one of Sarah's most trusted friends, the person she called when she needed advice, when she needed perspective, when she just needed someone who understood. The transition to wealth was harder than Sarah had imagined. She enrolled Maya in a private school, one of the best in the state, thinking it would give her daughter opportunities she had never had. But within the first week, Maya came home crying. "The other kids asked why we don't have a pool," she said, "and when I told them we used to live in a basement apartment, they looked at me weird, like I was lying or something." Sarah's heart ached. She had wanted to give Maya a better life, but she hadn't considered that better didn't necessarily mean happier. They had a long conversation that night about identity, about where they came from, and about the importance of never pretending to be something they weren't. "We have money now," Sarah told her daughter, "but that doesn't change who we are. We're still us. We still remember what it was like before. And that's not something to be ashamed of. That's our strength." Eventually, they switched Maya to a different school, one that was excellent, but more diverse, where being newly wealthy didn't make her an outsider. Maya thrived there, making friends who knew her for who she was, not what she had. Sarah learned an important lesson from that experience. Money could open doors, but it couldn't buy belonging. That had to be earned through authenticity. The renovation of Lincoln Elementary became Sarah's obsession. She was there almost every day, watching as workers carefully restored the building's original features while modernizing its functionality. She insisted on preserving as much of the original structure as possible. The wide staircases with their worn wooden banisters, the high ceilings with their tin tiles, the large windows that let in floods of natural light. Each element told a story, and Sarah wanted those stories preserved. One afternoon, while walking through the building during construction, Sarah discovered something the contractors had missed. Behind a section of wall they were demolishing, she found a small cavity that had been sealed off decades ago. Inside were dozens of letters, yellowed with age and tied with ribbon. She carried them carefully to a quiet corner and began to read. They were letters from students, children who had attended Lincoln Elementary between 1922 and 1945, writing to future students as part of some long-forgotten class project. Each letter described their lives, their dreams, their hopes for the future. Sarah read about a girl named Dorothy who wanted to be a doctor, though her teacher had told her that wasn't a proper ambition for a young lady. About a boy named James who dreamed of flying planes, even though his family could barely afford food. About a child named Sam who wrote simply, "I hope whoever reads this is happy. Todd, I hope the world is kinder to you than it was to us. Sarah sat there, surrounded by the ghosts of children who had walked these halls a century ago, and she wept. These were the people the Lincoln Trust had been created for. Children who had dreams, but no resources. Families who struggled, but persevered. The building wasn't just brick and wood. It was a repository of hope, of ambition, of the fundamental belief that education could change lives. She had the letters professionally preserved and later displayed them in glass cases throughout the community center. "These are the voices this building was built for," she told the archivist, who helped preserve them. "They deserve to be remembered." Sarah also faced challenges she hadn't anticipated. Wealth attracted not just long-lost relatives, but professional manipulators. She received investment opportunities that promised incredible returns, charities with heartbreaking stories requesting donations, business proposals that seemed too good to be true, and invariably were. Learning to say no became one of the most important skills she developed. One pitch came from a smooth-talking man who claimed to run an investment fund that specifically helped women entrepreneurs in developing countries. He had glossy brochures, testimonials, and an earnest manner that almost convinced Sarah. But something made her pause. She asked David to investigate, and within 24 hours, he had uncovered that the fund was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that had defrauded dozens of wealthy individuals. The man was arrested 3 weeks later. That experience taught Sarah to trust her instincts. She had spent years reading people, learning to spot when someone was genuine and when they were running a con. Poverty had made her skeptical, and that skepticism, she realized, was protection. She didn't need to become cynical, but she did need to stay cautious. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old girl named Destiny, who reminded Sarah achingly of herself. Destiny had been accepted to college with a full academic scholarship, but she couldn't afford to go because she was her family's primary income. She worked 3 part-time jobs to help support her younger siblings after her mother's death. When Sarah met her to present the scholarship, which included not just tuition, but living expenses and money for her family, Destiny broke down completely. "Why me?" Destiny asked through tears. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah took the girl's hands in hers. "Because someone should have done it for me," she said. "Because you deserve a chance. Because your family deserves to not have to choose between education and survival. And because I know exactly what it feels like to believe your dreams are impossible." Destiny graduated 4 years later at the top of her class and went on to medical school. She was the first of dozens of students whose lives were changed by the foundation. Each one represented a version of Sarah that might have been, if circumstances had been different. Each success felt personal, like she was rewriting her own past. But Sarah also learned that she couldn't save everyone. A man appeared at the community center one day, claiming to be homeless and asking for money. Sarah gave him $200 without hesitation. A week later, she saw him getting out of a nice car at the gas station. She felt foolish and betrayed. But Lisa, ever practical, told her, "So what? You gave money to one person who didn't need it, but you've helped dozens who did. Don't let one liar make you stop helping people." Sarah took that advice to heart. She couldn't screen every person, couldn't verify every story. Sometimes she would be taken advantage of, but that was preferable to becoming so guarded that she missed the chance to help someone who genuinely needed it. The relationship with the media was complicated. After the initial frenzy, interest died down, but it never completely went away. Every few months, a journalist would request an interview, wanting to do a "Where are they now?" piece. Sarah was selective about which requests she accepted, prioritizing local media and outlets that wanted to focus on the community center rather than her personal story. But there was one interview she agreed to that she would later regret. A national magazine sent a reporter who seemed genuinely interested in the work of the foundation. The resulting article, however, focused almost entirely on Sarah's poverty, describing her former life in terms that felt exploitative. They included details about the basement apartment, Maya's patched clothes, the eviction notice, painting a picture of desperation that, while accurate, felt like poverty tourism. The article made Sarah look like a victim who had been saved by luck, rather than a fighter who had earned her victory. The response from wealthy readers was predictably condescending. Sarah received letters from people congratulating her for pulling herself up by her bootstraps, completely missing the point that bootstraps were useless when you had no boots. She received advice on investing, budgeting, and managing her wealth from people who had never missed a meal in their lives. The experience left her feeling exposed and angry. She called the reporter and asked why the article had focused so much on her poverty rather than her work. The reporter, sounding genuinely surprised, said, "But that's the interesting part. That's what people want to read about." Sarah realized then that to many people she would always be the poor woman who got lucky. Never mind the intelligence, determination, and courage it had taken to claim what was rightfully hers. She stopped doing national interviews after that, focusing instead on local stories that understood the nuance. The second year brought new challenges. The community center was thriving, but Sarah discovered that good intentions didn't automatically translate to good outcomes. They had started a job training program that was supposed to help unemployed residents learn new skills, but the first cohort had a dropout rate of nearly 60%. Sarah was devastated. She had poured money and resources into the program. Why wasn't it working? She started attending the classes herself, sitting in the back and observing. What she discovered was that while the instructors were qualified, they didn't understand the realities of the students' lives. Classes were scheduled during times when many students were working their second or third jobs. The curriculum assumed students had computers at home for homework. No childcare was provided, no bus passes, no meal support. They had created a program that worked perfectly for people who didn't actually need it. Sarah called an emergency meeting of the foundation board. "We're designing from the top down," she said. "We need to design from the bottom up." They brought in former participants, asking them directly what barriers they faced. Then, they redesigned the entire program. Classes at multiple times, including evenings and weekends. Free childcare. Computers available for student use. Bus passes and gas cards. Meals provided. The dropout rate in the next cohort was less than 15%. That experience taught Sarah a crucial lesson. Helping people required more than money. It required understanding, empathy, and a willingness to admit when you were wrong. It required listening to the people you were trying to help and trusting them to know what they needed. Maya, now 9 years old, was beginning to understand what their money meant. She asked questions that were sometimes difficult to answer. Why do some kids not have enough food? Why can't everyone just have money like we do? Is it wrong that we're rich when other people are poor? Sarah tried to answer honestly, explaining about systems and structures, about luck and hard work, about the difference between deserving and having. One day, Maya came to her with her piggy bank. She had been saving money from her allowance, small bills and coins that amounted to maybe $40. "I want to donate this to the center," Maya said, "not to help kids who don't have enough." Sarah's first instinct was to tell her no, that $40 wouldn't make a difference, that she could keep her money. But then she reconsidered. This wasn't about the amount. It was about Maya learning that giving mattered, that she had a responsibility to use what she had to help others. "That's very generous," Sarah said. "How about we match it? For every dollar you give, the foundation will give $1 too." Maya's eyes went wide. "So my $40 becomes $80? "Exactly," Sarah said. They went to the community center together, and Maya presented her donation with the seriousness of someone much older. The director accepted it with equal gravity, thanking her formally and promising to use it to buy books for the children's reading program. On the way home, Maya was quiet. Then she said, "It feels good to help people." Sarah smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "Yes, baby, it really does." She realized then that she was raising her daughter with something she had never had herself, the ability to help others. And that might be the most valuable inheritance of all. The third anniversary of buying the school approached. Sarah stood in the lobby of the community center, looking at the attendance records. Over the past year, they had served nearly 3,000 people, children in after-school programs, adults in job training, seniors in social activities, families accessing resources. 3,000 lives touched, changed, improved. She thought about the compound effect of that. Each person helped went on to help others. Each life changed rippled outward. A woman approached her, someone Sarah didn't recognize. "Ms. Chen?" she said hesitantly. "I don't know if you remember me. I came to one of your job training programs 2 years ago. I was unemployed, about to lose my apartment. I didn't think I had any options left." Sarah listened as the woman continued. "The program helped me get certified as a medical assistant. I got a job at the hospital. I was able to keep my home. And last month, I saved enough to buy my first car. I just wanted to thank you. You saved my life." Sarah hugged the woman, feeling the truth of her words. This was why the building had been preserved. This was why the trust had been created. This was why she had fought so hard to claim what was hers. Not for the money itself, but for moments like this. For lives changed. For hope restored. For the chain of opportunity extending forward into a future she would never see. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. She thought about the journey from that basement apartment to this moment. About the terror of the auction, the discovery in the safe, the fight in the courtroom, the victory that had seemed impossible. She thought about how close she had come to not bidding at all, to talking herself out of taking the chance. What would have happened if she had? Someone else would have bought the building eventually. Someone else would have found the trust. Or maybe no one would have, and the money would have sat in that account forever, forgotten and useless. But she had bid. She had fought. She had won. And in doing so, she had learned something profound. The treasure had been hidden, not just in the building, but in herself. The courage to take a risk. The strength to fight back. The determination to see it through. Those qualities had always been there, forged by years of struggling and surviving. The money hadn't created them. It had simply revealed them. Sarah picked up her phone and called David. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "For you?" "Always," he replied. "I was thinking," Sarah said, "we should start a fund specifically for single mothers, women who are exactly where I was 3 years ago, scared, broke, running out of options. What if we could give them what I never had? Not just money, but support. Childcare, job training, mental health counseling, legal aid. A comprehensive program." She could hear the smile in David's voice. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's set up a meeting." They talked for another hour, planning and dreaming, and when Sarah hung up, and she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond anything money could buy. She had been given an extraordinary gift, not just wealth, but the chance to transform that wealth into meaningful change. The story of the woman who bought a school for $1 and discovered a fortune would be told and retold, growing with each telling into something mythic. But the real story, Sarah knew, was quieter and more powerful. It was about what happened after. About choosing to remember where you came from. About using privilege to dismantle the barriers that had once held you back. about understanding that luck without responsibility was just selfishness, and about believing that if one person could change their life with courage and determination, then maybe, just maybe, the whole world could change too. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.